investigation, and I remember one particularly disturbing series of disappearances that happened in Utah in 1960 to 1965. We were sent to investigate after a great number of local villages started reporting an increase in disappearances. The targets were equally males and females, and their age ranged anywhere from 5 to 86. There didn't seem to be a particular pattern to them, nor a particular motive. It was like these people just vanished into thin air. Now, mind you, we knew such a thing was impossible, but even with the help of the local police and many searches and rescues, we couldn't find a single body. No bones, nothing. A few corpses were found, but none of them were related to this particular investigation. We did try to find a link between the bodies and the disappearances, but nothing stuck. Another problem is that we didn't even know if all these disappearances were linked to one another. After all, a few of the missing teens could be eloping, seniors with Alzheimer's might have gotten lost, and a few unfaithful husbands and wives changing country with a new exotic lover wouldn't be surprising either. What made this case so bizarre was that even when accounting those possibilities, there was still an impressive number of unexplained disappearances. The guys at work had a blast coming up with conspiracy theories, and at some point, I think some of us even forgot that humans were involved. We even had a TOW theory, T-O-W, a theory of the week contest because we couldn't find any clues. We spent money deploying a couple of helicopters to survey the mountainsides, but we couldn't find anything. Now, that's when someone in our group suggested we started to investigate abandoned establishments. We had been asking left and right, and nobody came up with anything. Unfortunately, even if the places were abandoned, they were still government properties, or someone else's properties. Getting all the necessary papers in order could take some time. It was easier done with the government, so we investigated abandoned buildings relatively easy. I mean, we are the FBI. We found a few more bodies, but only one related to the disappearances. It was a teenage girl who died of a heroin overdose in an abandoned school, a local spot well known by junkies. If someone found her, they never said, and they left her there to rot. Otherwise, it was still nothing for our investigation. Once we were done with the exploration of government-owned lands, we moved to private properties that had been left to abandon. We contacted a few, met with others, and got most of them to agree with our search and rescue operation. Though, considering how a majority of those disappearances were getting a few months old, we were not very convinced about the whole rescue part of the operation. However, a few people refused, and for us to be able to get on their lands, we needed to get a warrant. Most of these were abandoned farms, and, well, God knows there's a ton of those in Utah. Unfortunately, to get a warrant, we needed a probable cause. You see, a suspicion that something illicit or that would put the lives of others at stake was happening on those lands. Which is when I, as well as a few of my colleagues, was sent to the most annoying state. Utah is probably one of the worst places to grow up in. Would I be a teen, I too would try to run away from the place. So I kissed my wife goodbye and said I was hoping that this would be resolved soon, because the last thing I wanted to do was spend more time than I needed in a dry state, especially in the middle of summer like this. The only thing is that I was staying at a luxury hotel, all meals included. It would almost be a vacation if it wasn't in Utah. Now I was tasked with the abandoned farm, aptly named Lost Wood Orchard. It apparently used to be a berry farm or something like that. I only brushed over the folder on the orchard because I wasn't very interested in its story. It was rather average. A man had several children, all of whom moved to the city. His wife died, and so did he a few years later, and the kids put the land up for sale, but no buyers ever bid. You see, the price was too high. There were too many lands, and while this place had potential, people were saying that it was cursed. Locals avoided it like the plague. They said this place just reeked of death. Now, when I visited the orchard the first time, I personally didn't feel anything. It was just land with a small, humble house at the front. The grass was tall and high from years of growing freely, and behind, well, I could see nothing else but green grass stretching for miles. I didn't think I'd ever seen grass grow that high, or that green. There was something peculiar about the smell, though. It smelled like freshly cut grass and fresh soil, even though this place looked like it hadn't been taken care of for over a decade. Grass had grown past the balcony ramps and reached to the lowest windows. And if there was a basement, well, I couldn't tell. And it didn't look very scary to me. Then again, as a boy who grew up in a town, I wasn't very superstitious or believed in curses. There was a bit of creepy vibe to it. But that's something that comes with every abandoned place that I've ever visited. Now, I was about to turn around when I saw someone getting out of the house, and so I turned off the engine of my car and walked toward the property. I reached for my pocket and pulled out my badge. When I was at the man's height, I couldn't help but notice how green his eyes were. Green like grass. I don't think I'd ever seen eyes like that. "I'm Agent Roberts. I was told this farm was abandoned." The man spat on the ground and stared at me quietly. He sported a 3-day salt and pepper beard, and he had curly hair. His cap hid most of it, but what was visible looked greasy and dusty. He also smelled like fertilizer. He told me he was one of the owners. This land was shared between a few siblings, and so I asked him his name, and he confirmed his identity. It matched with one of the siblings' name. I then asked him if I could walk around, but I remembered his family wasn't too fond of the idea of federal agents walking on their lands. But if he was there, maybe he'd be okay with it. Of course, he asked if I had a warrant, and obviously he wasn't okay with it. I proceeded to tell him why I wanted to look around, and I told him what I could about the disappearances, but he stared at me with what I can only describe as the best poker face ever. Sent the chill through my body, I'll admit it. But usually, when someone talks about children disappearing or seniors with Alzheimer's, people tend to express a little emotion. But it was like he was completely indifferent. Now I tried to appeal to his sympathy, by talking about how the parents were worried sick. And his answer? If you don't have a warrant, let the grass grow. Well, hell, I was taken aback. I had no idea what he meant by that, and so I simply thanked him for his time, and that I would come back with a warrant. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be able to get one so easily. I had no reasons to believe there was anyone on this farm, but the man's comments unsettled me. What did he mean by let the grass grow? That I needed to let the time run its course. I mean, what kind of answer is that when someone tells you people are worried about their missing friends and family and children? Well, it creeped me all the way down to my bones that someone would remain so cold to others' pain. And it just made me want to explore this abandoned orchard even more. Maybe it was just because the guy's attitude pissed me off, but my gut was also telling me I would find something there. So I came back at sundown with my flashlight, my gun, a big knife for cutting grass, and my badge. Maybe it was because it was almost nighttime, but this place seemed a hell of a lot creepier when it wasn't basking in the sun. Tall grass looked like tall blades dancing in the breeze. The noise of them bristling, making me a little nervous. I broke past the fence at the gate and instantly felt uneasy. I blamed the fact that what I was doing was illegal, and then vanquished my guilt by telling myself I was only here to investigate. I wasn't going to break anything, and if I got caught, I would say I heard a scream and thought someone was in danger. No big deal. So, Swallowing thickly, I made my way to the small cottage house and tried for the door. It was locked, obviously, right? But it was a shame because it was the first place I wanted to investigate. If there was anyone hiding or corpses, they would obviously be in the house, not in the stretch of grass in front and behind the house. I got off the balcony and walked around the house, cutting grass to help me walk around until I found a trap leading into the basement. It was chained, but the chain looked rusty, and I looked around for something I could use to break it. Soon enough, I found a shovel on the back porch, and after 2 or 3 good hits, I managed to split the chain and open the trap. I was almost disappointed when the air that came up from the underground wasn't one of decay, but simply humidity and dust. I used my flashlight and was about to go down when I heard a loud rustling coming from the tall grass behind the house. I quickly turned my flashlight in the direction I thought the noise came from and saw 2 little neon green eyes looking at me about 1 foot or 2 in the grass. Someone was staring at me. It felt like ice rushing down the length of my spine. I was here illegally, but there was something incredibly unsettling about those eyes. Hell, I couldn't stop looking at them. When I finally managed to gaze away, I barely had time to notice how gray their skin looked before whoever it was dashed deeper into the tall grass. I put my knife in its holster on my hip and got my gun instead, and I ran after them. I ran after it without thinking about where I was going. And at the distance I was, I didn't know if it was the man I'd met earlier, or maybe someone I was looking for on the disappearance list, or something else entirely. I'd never seen eyes so green, and it was the second time I had that thought in a day. And I commanded them to stop. I called out, "FBI, stop!" But they kept running and running until the bristling of the grass left in their wake stopped, and I lost trace of them. Where I was, the grass was about as tall as I was, and about as dense on the hair on my head. I realized I had no idea where I was. I was pretty sure I ran a straight line, but I didn't really take the time to check it. If I went straight back, could I find my way out of the grass? And I swallowed thickly and used my flashlight around me. The way I had come from couldn't be identified with light alone, because the grass had already retrieved its original shape and position, and even the ones I had just recently stepped on. Well, shit, I thought to myself before remembering I had my car keys on me. I could always make my car beep, and all of a sudden, the grass around me started to move, but I couldn't feel a breeze. I used my flashlight and caught onto those green eyes again. And then, the other pair appeared, much lower, and then another, and another until I was surrounded by creepy neon irises staring at me in the middle of the tall grass. They started moving closer, and now I could see it. I could see they were human, but their eyes, well, their eyes had nothing human in them. They were cold, inexpressive, and amidst the different bodies, I'd recognized the man I'd met in the morning. He was staring at me a couple meters behind the group walking toward me, and he was smiling. Let the grass grow. There was a whisper rising, and the closer those people were getting, the more fearful I became. I got my gun out and asked them to stay where they were, where I'd shoot them, but they didn't listen to me. Could I shoot? Some of them, despite their grayed skin and freaky eyes, didn't look a lick above 10 years old. I recognized some of the faces as the people who disappeared, and I wondered briefly if I fell upon a cult of sort, but nothing could explain the way their eyes glowed. And that's when I felt the grass wrap around my ankles and wrists. Let the grass grow. The whisper turned into a chant as the circle of missing folk closed in on me. I dropped my gun as the grasp on my wrist became so tight I couldn't hold it anymore. I felt like I was going to die, either killed by those crazy grass folks or by the grass itself, who now seemed to have a life of its own. I felt the grass cut into the skin of my wrist and I panicked. I started thrashing about. Praise be that I'm a muscular man and not only for show. And using all my strength, I pulled with my right wrist and managed to tear the grass from the ground. And instinctively, I reached for my knife again and started cutting. I cut the blades around my wrists first, and then I freed my ankles. The green-eyed folks were getting so much closer. Let the grass grow. I turned around and ran straight into one of them. His skin was grayed out, as if he didn't have a single drop of blood inside. And when I looked down, his feet were rooted into the ground. Literal roots. From the knee down, his skin was split like tree bark, and something neon green was linking him to the ground. I took a step back and saw him take a step forward. He was slow, much slower than the man I'd met during the day. I buried my blade in his stomach, but all that came out was a black liquid that smelled like fertilizer. No expression, no pain. I felt the blades of grass tentatively rising around my ankle and looked over my shoulder to see the man still smiling behind me. I pushed past the green-eyed folk without taking my knife back, the sound of their voices chanting, "Let the grass grow," behind me fueled me to run faster. I used my remote start and alarm and I heard my car beep and ran in the direction until my lungs burned. Even as I got in my car and sped away, my paranoia didn't relent. I kept looking over my shoulder, making sure one of them wasn't hiding in my car, ready to turn me into one of those green-eyed plant-like monsters. I called the office the next day and they didn't take me seriously. However, they did send a couple of cars and managed to get a warrant. Seeing how I had cuts on my wrists and ankles, they could say an agent was attacked on the property and they got their warrant. They found the bodies. All of them. They saw the green eyes. They erected a dome over the whole orchard, trying to figure out what happened. And this ought to be one of the creepiest experiences as an FBI agent. And I didn't stay long after that. I became a cop in the town I resided in with my wife. Didn't bother to ask questions about the Lost Wood Orchard farm in Utah either. 50 years later, and I still can't smell freshly cut grass without panicking.